Okay, the old-fashioned open bearings. Let's see if you can hear the grinding. Okay, they need to be replaced with new seal bearings. And see this left hand here? That indicates that the retainer for that bearing is a left-handed thread. Interestingly, there is no retainer. So I'll buy a retainer and new bearings for this wheel. All right, continuing with the rear wheel. This is the other side of the wheel, brake side. This is the type of retainer that's missing from the other side. This one I have all loose. Interestingly, this side has a sealed bearing. I don't know why one side would have a sealed bearing and the other side would have an original bearing, but we're going to replace both bearings with new sealed bearings. I cleaned up a portion of the sprocket just to show you how fish hooked the teeth are. They always wear in the direction of the chain pull. The chain sliding off the teeth fish hooks them. If you look at the tops, look at how humped they are. They're supposed to be square. And this is not supposed to be fish hooked this way. You can see how they're just being pulled right over, leaving behind the little worn part. So this sprocket should be replaced. Okay, now going over to the floor, here's your chain. You lay the chain down flat, not on edge, but flat. Put it on a straight line, which I use a crack in the floor for. And then you determine how far it deflects when you take all the slack out of the chain by pushing the end. So you push that end, and that's as far as it basically wants to go. It'll deflect just a little bit more, and like so. And anyway, if the chain went flat and tightened both ends against a straight line, 6 inches indicates a brand new chain. 6 to 8 inches indicates a reasonably new chain, well worth using. 8 to 10 inches indicates a chain that is at the outer limits of its useful life. After 10 inches deflection, you're running a worn out chain. Right now, this chain is showing about 17.5 inches deflection. In other words, the chain's worn out. So, that was fun. And turning to the workbench, this is a special tool used for removing these bearing retainers. They fit right in the little hole like that, and then you can rotate them without damage. Kind of a neat little tool, and it's adjustable. Then we move a little bit over here. These are your brake parts. Interestingly, I didn't mention it, but the brake drum on the wheel is actually in pretty good shape. No damage to the drum itself. The brake shoes are not worn out, but they are old-fashioned. They are riveted, and they are about halfway down to the rivet bottom, so I'm going to put a new set of brake shoes in here and a new set of brake springs. Might as well. And the rest of these bits and pieces will be cleaned, and when the parts come in, we'll put the bike back together. So that's where we are. Oh, let me show you something else. I'm going to stop now and I'll flip everything over and we'll talk. All right, what started this adventure was the fact that I couldn't get the brake lever to move back to its rear position. There was no spring to pull it back, or actually the spring that was there didn't work. So I tried and tried and tried to figure out why a spring that was hooked to this hole over here just wasn't right. I finally realized that the spring is supposed to be hooked over here to where there used to be a hole. And the spring fits on like this. And this part goes through the hole like so. And then the spring pulls the lever back to position after the brake is released. So, having realized that this is fake, somebody drilled that trying to make a spring work and never could. So I took this off and I'm going to have my welder weld a piece of backing aluminum here. That'll be stronger, and then I will re-drill this hole and put the thing back together. But this whole adventure inside your rear wheel started out because I couldn't get the return spring to work properly, and I didn't want to just hang a spring on it on the outside, because safety is important. Things that leave this shop really need to be returned to as stock as possible for liability reasons. And that's where we are. So we've gotten into the back wheel. We're doing a lot of might as well work. We're going to might as well replace the brake shoes, might as well replace the brake springs, we might as well replace the chain, we might as well replace the wheel bearings. Might as well, those are the three words that get men in more trouble, and women I should say, trying to be equal here. Those are the three words that get more people in trouble than the words I love you. There are three words in I love you, there are three words in might as well are really expensive words. So anyway, that's where we are. I'm going to just pan around here, show you the bike sitting here with its tail end up in the air. And oh, by the way, while we're talking about might as well, we might as well replace these nasty old original shocks. And we might as well replace that old tire, even though it has nostalgia. We've got the wheel off, and we might as well replace it now. So we're going to talk. Bye. I replace enough wheel bearings on these bikes that I stock them. Got bearings for just about every bike I work on. So this is a new sealed bearing in here, and that turns really nice and smooth and no noise. So it looks really good. This is where the missing retainer ring would go. It would be threaded in on those left-handed threads to hold that bearing in place. What was in there was a grease seal that doesn't do anything, and the spacer that does go in there. That's the right place for the spacer. So basically, once we put the retainer in, then this spacer sits on the bearing and spaces the rear wheel out. Keep in mind that the inner part of the bearing is what revolves. See, it turns, okay? So this being on there is the proper thing to do, because the wheel turns. Always remember, the wheel turns, the center of the bearing doesn't turn, even though that's what we turn when we're testing. Okay, so this being on here and the axle going through it, like so, puts it on the bike. Okay, I'll flip over and show you the other side. And this is the other side of the wheel, the brake side, and the new sealed bearing is installed, and the nice retainer ring is installed. So this side is finished. And I think that I will just simply pull this sprocket off, because I'm going to order a new one, and then I'm going to put the wheel back in the frame temporarily so I can roll the bike around while waiting for parts. Okay, here the wheel is with the rear sprocket removed. So I'm going to put the wheel back on the bike temporarily and say I'm done with the wheel for the day. All right, the rear wheel's back on the bike so I can move it around the shop while we wait for the parts I'm going to order. The brake is not installed because it's at the welders being repaired. And but the new bearings are, and just watch this. Oh, that is lovely. Look at how smoothly that revolves. Love it. Okay, so here's the spacer I told you about down here. That's what that does for a living. And once I put that missing retainer in place, this side of the bike will be complete also. So that's the rear wheel back on the bike temporarily. And just for grins, coming over to the workbench, which is a mess. These are all the bits and pieces and stuff that's not going to go back on the bike. I'm not going to put the passenger pegs back on because they rub up against the muffler. We'll get a new sprocket, new brakes. The bearings have already been replaced. New brake shoes, brake springs, and that will complete the overhaul on the rear wheel. Now, considering the condition of the brakes, considering the condition of the bearings, I am going to turn the bike around and take the front wheel off and examine the brakes and the bearings in the front wheel. I will probably do that tomorrow and then call the bike done while I order parts, and I'll work on something else. So progress has been being made, and we actually tried to start the bike. All we got was a couple of pops and spits, so we're not sure of exactly what's happening there. We may go through the carburetor one more time. We're pretty sure the timing is marked and set correctly. So, but I need Kevin to kick on it because I kicked on it so many times I threw out my back. So anyway, that's where we are. The bike is looking good. The rear wheel's been rebuilt with parts pending. The front wheel will be disassembled and examined, and we will do some more kicking on the bike to see if we can get it started, but probably not for another week or so because I need to work on some other bikes. And that's the way it is. It's one final video. It's 8 o'clock at night. The welder repaired the broken spring hook. I'll show it to you. Nice zoom in here. He did a beautiful job. Built that all up, and then I drilled the hole for the spring, and then I put the whole, I painted it and put the whole thing together temporarily just for show and tell. But you can see how the spring goes around and pulls the lever back towards the rear after the brake has been applied. So that's back to normal stock, looking good. Painted just because the welding sort of made the paint ugly, and no other reason. I painted the little brace also. So anyway, this is just magnificent. The welder did a beautiful job of rebuilding that broken hook mount, whatever you wish to call it. And it looks good. So when I get the new brake shoes and springs, I'll be able to put this together and put it back on the bike. I'm very pleased. And that's the way it is. And as I like to say, the fun just never stops.